Do you ever feel stuck? The alarm goes off and you think, is this really my life? Do you wish you could douse your relationships or your career or even your business with rocket fuel and throw a match on it? End the blah once and for all. They either launch or they burn up and you get to start over. I've been there and I see you. I'm Ben Walters, an entrepreneur, pastor, coach, and consultant. If you're ready to get unstuck and ignite your super pumped life or business, I'll give you the rocket fuel and the match. All you have to do is light it. Today, I'm excited to tell you why a cold cheesesteak, a Krispy Kreme strawberry donut, and some Chipotle chips with guac were the best meal I ever had. Here's the backstory. All of us like to talk about growth mindset. It's kind of a buzzword or buzz set of words right now. And, this idea that you should stretch yourself, you should try to do hard things, you should get uncomfortable. Everybody's telling you to do that. If you're listening to this podcast and you saw the title about the fast track to a growth mindset, you're one of them. Consultants are as guilty as anybody about this, just talking this to death. And it almost becomes a lot of blah, 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 growth, blah, 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 mindset. And I was thinking about the whole idea of mindset and just breaking down those two words, how mind is something that's up here in our head, and then set is to be stationary or to be stagnant. And I was thinking it's the complete opposite of what a growth mindset should be. A growth mindset should go from ideas in your head or aspirations in your head to actions you actually take in the real world, things you actually do, operationalized, right? That's growth. And set isn't good. We want to be dynamic. We want to be changing. We want to be expanding what we can do and moving and just being active and not set. None of us want to be set, because really, if you're not growing, you're dying. And that's the reality. And none of us want to be dying. And so this growth mindset is part of our DNA. In fact, in the 5 pillars of a super pumped life, it's holistic health, purposeful work, strong relationships, financial harmony, and you can call it growth mindset. You can call it go for it. You can call it taking on challenges, but something where you're stretching yourself is the 5th pillar. So with that in mind, it's something that I have to really force myself to live out. Otherwise, it's just a lot of blah, 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 blah. We had on in episode 8, a guy named David Adams, and David Adams is a fascinating story, and go back and listen to that particular episode. But he uses fasting as a method to help heal his body and his mind and help him live a super pumped life. And so when we had that episode, after my wife heard it, she said, I would love to do a fast, a long fast like David Adams. And of course I said, yeah, that sounds great. Now I'm thinking in my head, I have no more interest in doing a fast than I have in hanging upside down from the 10th floor out of a building. It just doesn't appeal to me. My motor runs high and I need a lot of fuel, which is food to eat. And I love to eat. I love the social aspect. I love trying new things. I don't know that there's very many foods other than peas that I really don't like. And so to think of not eating is just a terrible thought. And so, but a good husband, I said, yeah, that sounds great. So that's how a lot of things are in our minds. They're just stuck in our mind. And it's similar for you. Maybe you've listened to a podcast about growth mindset, or you've read a Mel Robbins book and, you've let them theory percolate around, or maybe you've even taken a Mind Valley class or a master class on some particular topic and you think, I'm getting there, I can do this. And so it's all it is, though, is an intellectual exercise. It stays in our mind and we continue to be set in our ways. But with this idea of a fast, last Friday, my wife went to the doctor and she was having some health issues, and she and the doctor began to talk about what it would look like if she did a 72-hour fast. So she came home from that and she said, I want to do a 72-hour fast. And I thought, oh, this is hitting close to home. This is coming out of the mind and actually starting to head toward targeting the stomach, where I'm not going to have any food for a while. And so I said, oh, it sounds good. And I'm hoping it died right there, but it didn't. She said, starting Sunday, are you in? Now, those are 3 scary words. When someone says, are you in? It's like, oh, this is where the rubber meets the road, right? I can talk a big game as a, consultant and a big shot about growth mindset, go for it, challenge yourself, stretch, blah, 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 blah. But if I don't do it, I'm not living it. I'm a fraud. I'm just talking the talk without walking the walk. And so I said, okay, let's do it. And she said, we're starting Sunday. Oh, yeah. Wow. Okay. Sunday it is. And so then I began to think in my head, what excuses could I come up with to not do this fast? I thought, do we have any social engagements, or is there, something with the kids, or a end of year party or anything? And she was pretty smart, because there was nothing really on the calendar that would prevent me from fasting. And so I grudgingly agreed, let's go ahead and try this fast. And so Sunday night rolls around, and we pulled out every food we thought might spoil between Sunday and Thursday, and we prepared a king's feast, and we ate and we ate. And I can remember thinking, I wonder if I could eat enough food on Sunday night, just gorge myself, that I wouldn't even feel hungry for 72 hours. Well, I can tell you the answer is no. I felt a little bloated that night because I ate way too much, but it didn't last very long. I was fine the rest of that night and through breakfast. But around lunchtime the next day, I was starting to get hungry, and it was getting worse and worse, and wasn't feeling all that great. And so I thought, I was on a particular workplace, and I thought, I'm going to go to the desk and see if I can grab some gum out of the desk. There's always gum in the desk. So I went to the desk for gum, and the only things there were Reese's peanut butter cups and peanut M&Ms. Now, I don't know if the fasting gods were just trying to tempt me, trying to derail me, but those are two of my very favorite candies in the whole world. And so I slammed the drawer shut, and I walked out of that office, and I thought, holy cow, that was not going to happen for me, but I'm still just gnawingly hungry. Then the next day was even worse, because I was around a lot of food that day, different things going on. And I texted my wife and I said, are you struggling too? Because I thought maybe it's just me. And she said, no, I'm really having a tough time as well. And I said, this is tough. And she said, well, if you think you have it tough, listen to what happened to me. She said, today was the end of year party. Now she works in a school. And so they had a big kind of carry in, everyone bring a favorite dish type of luncheon. And so there were all kinds of great foods and treats and sweets. And then on top of that, the principal of the building said, hey, Kristen, could you go to Cane's and pick up the Cane's? We've ordered catering for the lunch. And she, of course, didn't want to say no to her boss, but she drove to Cane's, and she had to load in these trays of just piping hot, delicious smelling Cane's chicken fingers, one after the next. And she said it was everything she could do to muster the will on the way home, not to peel back the top of those containers of Cane's and just throw down 3 or 4 chicken tenders. And so she gets back, and she during the event, she went table to table, almost like a bride and groom would do at a wedding thing, just visiting with different folks in the school. She said, not because I really wanted to socialize with everybody. She said that's fine, and she's social, but because she didn't want to be just sitting at the table like a victim watching everybody else eat. So I thought that was an interesting and smart strategy. But then she said the kicker was, she said, I got back in the car at the end of the school day, and she said that car still smelled just as delicious with Cane's as if all the Cane's was sitting right there on the seat. And she said I had to drive home smelling that Cane's. And I said, yeah, that is rough. And so we began to think about what would we eat, what would we do when the fast was over on Wednesday evening at 8:30. And so that helped get us through a little bit longer. And then the next day, that's when it got really rough for me. So this is in that kind of third day of this whole exercise. And I was really struggling. So I picked up my phone and I texted David Adams, and I was like, buddy, how do you do this? How do you survive this? And he said, first off, you can do this. So he was encouraging. He said, you can do this. He said, first off, it's not going to kill you. So don't worry about that. And don't use that as an excuse to just start eating. And he said, secondly, he said, you are addicted to carbohydrates. And I thought, yeah, guilty as charged right here. This guy has seen a few carbs in his day. And so he said, your body is almost detoxing from those carbs. So he said, that's natural. You're going to feel pretty crappy, but that's okay. And then he said, the third thing is that it will start to pass. It will start to get easier. You'll be able to do this. And I know you got this. And he said, just stay strong. You will get to the 72 hours and you will be glad you did. And so I jumped off the phone there, and that was that. And so that kind of reaching out to him as an expert on this really helped me get by. Then I began to think about all this that had transpired. I began to think, how am I doing this? Someone who likes to eat so much, how am I actually surviving this 3-day fast? And I thought, well, the first step was I took action. We started a fast at 8:30 on Sunday night. And it was as simple as starting at 8:30, we didn't eat anymore. So think about a fast. There's no cost to it. In fact, it saves you money because you're not buying food during that time. It adds time to your day because all the time you would have spent shopping for food, preparing food, eating food, you have that time on your hands to do other things. And so I did some spiritual reading, and I just took time to meditate and to pray and to reflect and just to kind of center myself. So that was really a bonus. This was kind of a benefit, and it didn't cost me anything. So the first thing though was just starting the fast and deciding I'm not going to pick up a fork. I'm not going to pick up a bag of M's. I'm not going to take this hand and throw food in this mouth. And so that was a free, simple first step. And then I made it public. I said, okay, I'm on a fast. So that way people at work, when I was face to face in the drawer with the Reese's and the peanut M&Ms, they're looking at me. They're like, what is he doing in that drawer? So if I pull those out and start throwing them down, right, they're going to be like, wow, so much for the fast, huh, buddy? And then it would have become a bit of a joke around the office. Like, yeah, really good. I knew you couldn't do it. And so you begin to put a little bit of healthy pressure on yourself when you go public with these things. It's the same thing with any kind of challenge you take on. Once you let people know that, you don't want to let them down, and you don't want to let yourself down. You don't want to feel that kind of regret. And so that is a really strong thing. The other thing to understand is whenever you do something hard, there is going to be a temptation to quit. There will be what I would call off ramps where you could intellectually justify why you're going to take the off ramp and not continue to do that hard thing. But you've got to resist that, which leads me to my third point about this, which is one of the most important ones, which is don't do this alone. Lean on other people. When you're thinking, man, I really want to hit that off ramp for this hard thing, text somebody else who's accompanying you on that. For me, that was my wife. But there's also other people you can reach out to. David Adams was a resource to me. He's not even in the same town or city that I'm in. But I was able to text him and say, buddy, I'm struggling with this. I'm, in the third day, and I don't know if I'm going to make it to the finish line. And he picked me up and he said, you can do this, Ben. You got this. So when you do hard things, build a community around you. The fourth point about this is this happened to me on that final day of the fast. I play a lot of pickup basketball. And so I went and I played pickup basketball, and it felt like I was just running in concrete. I was so slow. I had literally no giddy up in my game. And my game isn't too great other than hustle anyway. So my game was terrible that day. But I just felt physically like I had nothing in the tank. I had nothing to give. And then I noticed in the airport, so I had to fly that night as the fast is starting to wind down. I had to fly from Cincinnati to Atlanta to Phoenix. And in the Atlanta airport, I had a pretty quick connection between gates. And normally I'm the fastest person in the concourse, walking between the gate and then the tram and getting off the tram and then heading up the escalator and doing the whole Atlanta airport thing. But on this particular day, it was like I was being passed. It felt like I was being passed by little old ladies in walkers, eking along. I was just that slow. And I began to look at my watch, and I'd put it on as if I was walking a mile, and it was super slow. It was like in the 20 minutes. And I didn't even think I was slow. But the reality was physically, I was weak. I was slowing down. But the cool thing was mentally, I was getting stronger. So there was a weird dichotomy there between basically giving up some physical strength to strengthen myself mentally. And sometimes that happens as we try to grow holistically, right? We try to have this growth mindset. What we have to do sometimes is give a little bit on one thing, weaken ourselves on one thing in order to strengthen ourselves on another thing and become stronger overall. And then we can fill up back our tank on the other thing, which brings me to the final thing. So my fast was set to end an hour and a half into a 4-hour flight between Atlanta and Phoenix. And so I was dying to eat. And so I went through the airport, but I had to go through the airport about 2 hours and 15 minutes before the actual time that I would be able to finish the fast. So in other words, I was going to have to break the fast on the plane. And so I got my Krispy Kreme donut and I was really excited about that. It was fresh, it looked delicious. And then I got Chipotle chips and guac. And then I got a Philly cheesesteak, which smelled absolutely spectacular. But here's the thing. I made two mistakes on this. First off, a Philly cheesesteak that smells delicious 2 hours and 15 minutes earlier in the airport doesn't smell so good at 35,000 feet out over Mississippi as you're cruising along in that airplane. That thing was the soggiest, nastiest mess you can ever imagine. And then Chipotle chips on an airplane where you're sitting about this close to the person next to you, in my case, a guy, a bad idea. Nobody wants to be next to the guy who's chomp, 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 scoop in the guac, chomp, 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 scoop in the guac, chomp, chomp, chomp. Completely obnoxious, completely rude. And yet here I was so hungry that I kept doing it. I knew I couldn't buffer myself on that one. So my apologies to everybody around me in row 23 on the Delta flight last week from Atlanta to Phoenix. That was my bad. And so even though those things were terrible choices, both for my health and for the airplane and actually for the taste, those items never tasted so good. So when you think about growth mindset, one of the quickest ways to fast track yourself is to actually do something, to take a first step, to get growth mindset out of the mind and out of the set position and into the physical activity, operationalized, doing, becoming, being, and dynamically changing. And so take that first step, go public with it, let people know what you're doing. Understand you're going to be tempted to quit. This is going to be hard. Remember that you don't have to do this alone. And finally, know that when you're strengthening one area, you might become a little weaker in the other area. So those are all the takeaways from this. And if you need help on something you're going to take on, I guarantee you the people at Super Pumped want to help you out. Every guest that comes on as an interview are salt of the earth folks who have a genuine heart to serve others. And so I guarantee you, if you're starting an ice cream business and you contact me on the consultation portion, we're going to figure out a way to get you in contact with Don and have him help you out a little bit. Or if you want to think about some of the stuff David said or Lauren or whoever the guest is. And I love helping people. So I will jump into everything I can to help you achieve your goals and to grow as a person. Keep well. Thanks for joining me today on the Super Pumped podcast. If you enjoyed today's show as much as I did, I have 3 quick next steps for you. First, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Next, leave me a review in your podcast app and tell your friends about the show so others can find and benefit from the Super Pumped community. And finally, to put the ideas from today's show into action, visit us at superpumped.com to view the show notes, book a complimentary consultation, or take our free business launch readiness assessment. Keep well, and I'll see you next time.